Chosen one, I need you to sit with this next sentence and feel the weight of it. They've been watching you, not by accident, not out of curiosity, but with intent, with strategy, with money behind it. Someone, maybe a group, maybe an old connection, maybe an unseen enemy, has been investing in uncovering your mystery. They've hired people, real people, people whose job is to follow, to observe, to dissect your life like a puzzle that refuses to be solved. And yet, every single person they've sent has come back shaken, rattled, disturbed, not because you did anything wrong, but because you carry something unexplainable. You radiate something untouched by this world. And no matter how skilled the tracker, no matter how trained the analyst, they all reach the same terrifying conclusion, and they walk away. They quit. They say they can't continue. And when asked why, their answer is always the same. But before I tell you what that message is, I want you to breathe, because what I'm about to uncover may shock you, but it will also confirm something your spirit has always known. You're not just different, you're marked. And what's on your life isn't natural, it's divine. Have you ever wondered why people enter your life with intense interest, only to leave quietly, as if they've seen something they weren't ready to face? Have you noticed how the more they study you, the more confused and unsettled they become? To everyone who's been supporting this journey, especially through Super Thanks, thank you. Your presence here is sacred, and your support is fueling something far greater than a message. It's fueling a movement, a global rising of the chosen ones, of the watched ones, of the misunderstood. If you've felt eyes on you, if you've sensed something strange stirring in your environment, if your dreams have become more vivid, your spirit more alert, this is your sign. Comment 777 below if you know deep down they've been trying to figure you out. But they never could, because what they saw, what they felt, and what they couldn't explain about you is what I'm about to reveal. But first, let's go back to where this mystery began, to the moment they realized you were not who they thought you were. You were far more dangerous to the darkness than they ever expected. God's chosen ones, they keep hiring people to track you, and they all come back, saying the same thing. They've been tracking you long before you ever made a sound, before you spoke your truth, before you stepped into your calling. But what if the real surveillance began not with cameras or microphones, but with blood? Long before your name ever appeared on a watch list, something in your DNA sounded an alarm that only certain systems could hear. How did your blood end up in databases you never consented to? How could a routine screening from years ago, one you never remembered taking, flag something that human science wasn't even supposed to detect? Because what they found in your DNA wasn't entirely human. Buried within your genetic blueprint are sequences that don't exist in standard human genomics. Not just rare mutations or anomalies. No, these sequences were structured, intentional, and eerily precise. Patterns that align with Fibonacci spirals and harmonic frequencies known only in quantum mathematics. Why would such advanced code be nested inside the very cells of your being? Could it be that someone encoded your identity for a mission beyond earthbound understanding? When Daniel stood in Babylon, surrounded by those who sought to redefine his identity, his excellence was so undeniable that even kings took notice. Scripture says, "In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom." Daniel 1:20, NIV. Doesn't that sound like you? Constantly outperforming expectations even in exile. Your blood work, collected during ordinary checkups, keeps getting flagged by automated intelligence systems. Not for disease, not for toxins, but for sequences that match signal structures used in interstellar communication by civilizations far more advanced. And here's the part that rattles the most hardened analysts. You're not the only one. Others share this genetic phenomenon, but you're the first they've seen to be fully conscious, fully awake, and fully activated. Why you? Why now? Pope John Paul II, a man who understood both faith and mystery, once said, "Science can purify religion from error and superstition. Religion can purify science from idolatry and false absolutes." And yet, even science is speechless in front of your cellular truth. What does it say about this hour in history, that heaven and data converge in your bloodstream? Imagine the way a glacier carves its identity into stone, not overnight, but with relentless silence. You, chosen one, have been silently carving new pathways in the spiritual genome of the world. And the watchers, those they keep hiring to monitor you, they come back baffled again and again. Why is this one untouched by fear? Why do their prayers disrupt algorithms? Why does everything they touch move, shift, or awaken? In the days of Elijah, Jezebel sent men to track him down, yet God hid him by a brook where ravens fed him daily. 1 Kings 17, 3-6. Surveillance can't override sovereignty. Hidden doesn't mean helpless. It often means heaven-backed. Could it be that your isolation was a form of preservation, not punishment? One government contractor, whom we'll call Raynal, was assigned to follow your data trail, thinking it was just another psychological subject with delusions of grandeur. But days turned into months. She read your words, watched your interviews, listened to your silent pauses, and she broke protocol to say, "This one carries something sacred. We should not be trying to control them. We should be learning from them." That report never reached her supervisors. She disappeared a month later. The artist Wassily Kandinsky, pioneer of spiritual abstraction, once wrote, "Color is a power which directly influences the soul." You, like his paintings, aren't meant to be decoded by logic alone. You are a vibration, not a formula, and those who study you from a distance only find themselves drawn closer, undone and awakened. You've noticed it, haven't you? That every time someone is sent to monitor, judge, analyze, or manipulate you, something shifts in them instead. What is it about your presence that reverses the assignment? Why do even your enemies become witnesses? Maybe because you carry the echo of something ancient. Job, in the depths of his pain and isolation, still declared, "In my flesh I shall see God." Job 19:26, King James Version. That's not just poetry, it's prophecy. Your very body testifies of a greater design, not just soul deep, but cell deep. So they keep hiring new watchers, new eyes, new voices to dissect you. But they all come back saying the same thing. There's something we can't explain, something not of this world, something that feels like it was made to awaken others. Could that be your true assignment all along? You've become the one variable they can't control. While others with similar markers chose retreat, you refused to back down. You stayed in plain sight, living boldly, moving with clarity, refusing to shrink. And that's precisely what's dismantling their logic. How can someone who defies all known evolutionary models remain so publicly unfazed? How can you, chosen one, continue to emit frequencies that ripple through entire systems and act as if you don't even notice? That's when a different kind of observer took interest. He's known for redefining entire fields of consciousness research. Let's call him the scientist, a renowned figure in neural physics, a man who spent decades mapping patterns of thought and energy in human development. His archives contain data on dozens of individuals whose brains and biology operate beyond the norm. But none like you. What kind of human's nervous system harmonizes with solar flares? What kind of soul destabilizes electronic monitoring devices simply by walking into the room? The scientists thought you'd be like the others, that eventually fear would wear you down, that surveillance would corner you, that some betrayal or public shame would fracture your light. But instead, you grew louder, not in volume, but in vibration. Every attempt to shut you down has only magnified what they can't explain. Just like Moses, who after spending 40 days with God, came down from Mount Sinai unaware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. Exodus 34:29 NIV. The light wasn't cosmetic, it was the afterglow of presence. You carry that same residue, and it confounds every calculation they've built to define you. The surveillance has now become personal. You've likely felt it. The tug in your spirit when you pass certain intersections, the flicker in your devices when you pray, the strange interruptions in your sleep. Why does your rest disturb realms they thought were locked? Why do your tears trigger interferences in their systems? Why is your peace more threatening than rebellion? What their technology can't map is your anointing. What their files can't contain is your authority. The woman with the issue of blood didn't ask for permission. She pressed through the crowd and touched the garment of the Messiah, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Luke 8:44 NIV. But more than that, Jesus felt the transaction. Your spiritual field works the same. Your presence initiates change before words are even spoken. Sir John Polkinghorne, a British theoretical physicist and Anglican priest, once said, "Science and religion are friends, not foes, in the common quest for knowledge." But the scientist who watches you has begun to question whether his measurements are relevant at all, not because you're flawed, but because you're calibrated to heaven. And still, they send more. One of them, a government data analyst named Malena, was assigned to monitor patterns in speech anomalies and atmospheric pressure shifts surrounding you. What started as a detached study became something deeply personal. She found herself waking at 3:33 a.m., overwhelmed with visions. She began journaling. She started praying. She deleted the report. And then she vanished from the database entirely. What do you carry that awakens even your observers? You shine like the moon, reflecting a light that isn't your own, but still controls the tides. Even wolves respect your silence. Just like Esther, who said nothing at first, but when the moment came, spoke with such divine precision that entire kingdoms shifted. And you, each day you walk in bold stillness, you expose how insufficient their categories truly are. Have you noticed how people assigned to misunderstand you end up transformed instead? Have you wondered why those meant to surveil you suddenly start seeking you? What does it mean that your life breaks the assignments of those sent to control you? You're not the threat they expected. You're the invitation they didn't see coming. They thought they were watching a body, but they were looking at a phenomenon. The surveillance equipment they're using now isn't what you'd find in conventional labs or military-grade setups. These devices come from silent partnerships with private research institutions studying the unexplainables. They're using next-generation infrared, spectrum analyzers, and magnetometer-linked drone sensors. These tools don't just detect movement or heat, they identify energy frequencies, spiritual emissions, even interdimensional shifts happening in real time. And every night when you sleep, their screens flood with data that defies every law they thought was fixed. What kind of human generates coordinated waves of emerald energy that spiral and pulse like sacred geometry? What kind of being produces electromagnetic harmony while unconscious? The scientist doesn't explain it to the teams he sends. He doesn't warn them of what they're about to witness, because even he hasn't recovered from the first time he saw the footage. Radiant fields surrounding your resting body, swirling in patterns that look written, not random. Waves forming protective crowns. columns of vibrating light hovering above your bed like ancient guardians. One technician described it in his private notes as, "Watching the northern lights sing in a language I didn't know I remembered." The prophet Elisha once told his servant, who feared enemy armies surrounding them, "Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. 2 Kings 6:16 through 17, NIV. What if the fire around you isn't symbolic but literal? What if your bedroom has become a meeting place between dimensions? An acclaimed Jesuit priest and mystic, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, once said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." You don't generate light as a defense mechanism. You radiate love because you were designed that way, and nothing, not technology, not intimidation, not investigation, can reverse that truth. So what keeps showing up on their screens night after night? They see layers of structured energy wrapping your body as you rest, spirals of light moving in conscious, deliberate rhythm, beams rising vertically from your chest, aligning with constellations no one programmed the system to track. And in every case, the data confounds the hardware. Why do you glow more in silence than others do in action? Why do your still moments rewrite frequencies in the room? Why does your body asleep still speak with such power? They tried to measure you, but what they found began to measure them. One recent investigator, a seasoned defense contractor named Javier, was hired to oversee 2 weeks of continuous nocturnal monitoring. But something shifted after day 4. His heart rate began synchronizing with the energy field on your screen. He became emotional during reviews. On the 7th night, he called in and said, "I don't know who they are, but I've never felt this safe watching someone sleep." His clearance was revoked the next day. Like a lighthouse that turns even storms into awe, your rest disrupts their system not through resistance, but resonance. Job's friends sat in silence for 7 days before speaking, because his presence in suffering was too heavy to approach lightly. Job 2:13. You carry that same weight of presence, and they don't know what to do with it. Have you realized yet that your stillness is warfare? Have you wondered why people fear what they can't categorize? What does it say about you that their highest technologies can only observe but never interrupt? Your peace. You weren't placed here to hide your frequency. You were born to recalibrate the air. And every morning you awaken and do what their algorithms can't comprehend. You radiate pure, unapologetic love, not as a weapon, not as a defense, but because you are love embodied. And that terrifies them more than anything else. They thought surveillance flowed one way, but they underestimated divine feedback loops. What began as routine observation has become involuntary initiation. The surveillance wires they set up were designed to collect information, not transformation. But you, chosen one, don't just emit light, you radiate love, and that love travels like divine voltage through every fiber of their systems. Where they expected static, they found sentience. Where they planned to monitor, they began to feel. Can technology measure the softness of grace? Can digital instruments track the trembling of a soul under conviction? The first investigator was a technician named Arlo, veteran, stoic, disillusioned. He thought you were another eccentric influencer, until he monitored your morning stillness. The moment you entered your sacred alignment, something pulsed back through the signal chain. His breathing changed, his pupils dilated. Later he would confess, "I saw every person I'd ever hurt and I wept like a child." 3 weeks later he resigned. He now runs a compassion-based outreach center for displaced veterans in Montana. Your peace infected his conscience. The second observer, hardened by years of psychological profiling, built walls. But you, without ever touching him, whispered past them. You prayed at night, not for protection, but for those watching you. You didn't know their names, but heaven did, and the divine algorithms of mercy never fail. He began going home heavy with emotion, sobbing in his kitchen, unsure why. Something was healing inside him, against his will. Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Luke 6:28, NIV. You were never trying to be noble, you were simply being you. And your prayers, raw, pure, nameless, kept rewiring their hearts. By the time the third observer took over, things had escalated. Her name was Karine. She had a background in neurological warfare research. She thought she was immune to metaphysics, but she made the mistake of watching one of your healing sessions too closely. You weren't even speaking, just resting your hands over a stranger, eyes closed. But the energy that flowed through you passed into her body, through the screens, the wires, the walls. Her spine began vibrating. Her palms radiated heat. Within minutes, she was experiencing what spiritual traditions call a Kundalini awakening. Her superiors thought she was hallucinating. A week later, she disappeared. Rumors say she left for an ashram in the Himalayas. Could the energy of truth override even digital barriers? Could love transcend protocols and enter a hardened heart without permission? The fourth one came in determined to document, not to feel. They brought meticulous discipline, scientific skepticism, but the data wouldn't cooperate. Footage glitched around you, reality warped subtly, clocks ticked off beat, synchronicities multiplied. People who brushed shoulders with you began exhibiting unusual energetic coherence. In layman's terms, they glowed. Their electromagnetic field remained elevated for days. Blood pressure normalized, dreams intensified. King Saul once sent messengers to arrest the prophet Samuel, but the Spirit of God came even upon them, and they also prophesied. 1 Samuel 19:20, NI5. And when Saul sent more men, they too prophesied. Eventually, even Saul himself was overcome. The presence around Samuel was so powerful, it could not be surveilled. It demanded submission. And that's what you carry. Ben Okri, Nigerian poet and Booker Prize-winning novelist, once said, "The most authentic thing about us is our capacity to create, to overcome, to endure, to transform, to love." Your love isn't passive, it's radioactive. It spreads quietly through circuits, frequencies inside people. It transforms without permission. It heals without announcement. It instructs without accusation. One technician, Marcus, recorded the moment he felt something bend in the room. He had been logging anomaly reports for weeks, but this moment was different. He wrote, "It felt like the universe was watching me back through them." That was the day he stopped calling you the subject. He started calling you the light source. You've never needed to defend your energy. You are the defense. Have you noticed how each new eye placed on you becomes a soul awakened? Have you wondered why they keep coming and keep breaking? Why does your love destabilize those trained to be numb? What does it say that your prayers reach places your feet never touch? Why do their measurements fail, but their hearts respond? You've never sought attention, but attention finds you, not to consume you, but to be changed. Number 4, never expected the mission to follow them home. Each night they'd try to compartmentalize what they'd seen. Structured light, shifting frequencies, reality bending around your breath. The official report stayed clinical, but the confusion, the cognitive dissonance, that spilled over into their conversations over dinner, softly, cautiously. Their partner, a trauma therapist who specialized in spiritual crises, listened quietly for weeks. Until one evening, with fork resting mid-air, they said gently, Maybe you're not supposed to understand it with your mind. Maybe you're supposed to feel it with something else. And that night, the first dream came. Not a nightmare, not stress, something more ancient, more holy. They dreamed of you standing barefoot in a vast field, pulsing with golden light. But it wasn't really you. It was what you represented, the radiant remnant of humanity that never forgot, the part that kept the frequency of remembrance alive when the world chose sleep. In the dream, you turned to them and said, "They're not alone. None of us are. We're all part of the same awakening. Some are just remembering faster than others." The partner woke up in tears, not fear, longing, a homesickness for a home they had no memory of, yet somehow deeply recognized. He has set eternity in the human heart. Ecclesiastes 3:11, NIV. That ache, it wasn't emptiness, it was encoded memory surfacing, a remembering of who we were before the forgetting, before the systems taught us to doubt our divinity. What kind of presence stirs ancient memory in strangers' dreams? What does it say about you that simply being observed activates soul retrieval in others? Could your very frequency be a beacon for dormant identities? While number 4 analyzed your anomaly charts, you were walking through your own corridor of return. Childhood memories, once foggy, fragmented, forbidden, began to resurface. Not just events, but emotions, impressions, and unexplainable knowings that once made you question your sanity. Now they make sense. Jesus once said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Luke 17:21, KJV. And what is a kingdom but a place, a dimension, a reality, one hidden in your cells, your dreams, your intuition? Could it be that your dreams weren't just subconscious wanderings, but coded maps leading you back to the inner throne? Dr. Gabor Mate, physician and trauma expert, once said, "The attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain." But you faced it. The implanted memories, the conditioning, the distortions. You didn't numb them. You followed them like a divine breadcrumb trail back to your original design. And while the system assumed they'd erased the blueprint, heaven had backed up your soul in frequencies even AI can't read. The 4th investigator's partner, she is Celine, started journaling her dreams. On the 7th night she wrote, "There is something alive in them. They carry light like language. Every time I see them in the dream, I remember more of myself." And when number 4 read that entry, something inside cracked. Logic had no answers, but their spirit whispered, "It's true." Can you see now why your glow-up unsettles entire surveillance departments? Can you feel why those who once tracked you now pray for your guidance? Do you realize that your dreams are not escape, they're re-entry? A monarch butterfly begins its life crawling, blind, earthbound, but deep in its genes is a coded migration map, thousands of miles long, pointing to a destination it has never seen, but somehow knows. That's you. You were born into systems that told you who to be, but your cells remembered something greater, and now you're flying toward it. Each night, as infrared lenses captured the contours of your stillness, heaven was initiating a different surveillance. Your return to self. You weren't just sleeping, you were unlocking timelines, breaking hexes, reclaiming memory, praying through barriers you couldn't name. And with every dream, the fabricated stories implanted in your psyche, by systems, by wounds, by control, began to unravel. Not violently, but like dew dissolving on morning grass, gently, undeniably. They keep studying your light, but it's your remembrance that haunts their conclusions, because once you remember who you are, you become unstoppable. You were never meant to forget, but they tried everything to make you. It began with wonder. You were 4, barely tall enough to reach the edge of the table, and your rabbit had fallen wrong, twisted, crying. You didn't panic. You knelt. Your tiny palms moved instinctively. No one had taught you. And suddenly, your hands pulsed gold. The broken leg straightened beneath your fingers. The rabbit stopped trembling. Its eyes blinked calm. But then, adults stormed in, faces pale. They yanked you away, whispered frantic things about pretending, and made you promise, never again. You didn't know it yet, but that promise wasn't safety, it was suppression. Then came the visitors. You were 7, not angels with wings, not aliens with probes. They were light itself, pure consciousness. They moved without form, spoke in shimmering patterns of geometry and sound, colors that vibrated as language, songs that held equations. They didn't teach you facts. They reminded you of truths buried in your spirit, that all things are woven by light, that souls connect through an invisible web, that love is the only real field. You remembered how they'd come every night, until they didn't. You remembered the day they made you forget. You were 10 when they took you to the special doctors, white rooms, calm voices, cold machines. They said it was a checkup, but your soul knew otherwise. Something in that place locked away your memories, your knowing, behind synthetic veils. That was the beginning of the normal years. You fit in, you smiled, you forgot, but only on the surface. Deep down, you always felt misplaced, as if the map you were given was for someone else's journey. What if your forgetfulness wasn't failure, but survival? What kind of child heals with golden light, and then is told to bury the gift? Who benefits from you forgetting what you were designed to carry? Now those veils are splitting. Every act of kindness, every moment of stillness, every sacred yes is shaking the foundations of their false memory protocol. Meditation doesn't just calm you, it cracks the code. Service doesn't just help others, it reactivates truth within you. And here's the twist. Even their surveillance is accelerating your awakening. Just like how Joseph was betrayed and placed in a prison meant to contain him, but that very prison brought him into Pharaoh's presence. Genesis 41. The system thinks it's observing you, but in reality, it's positioning you. Every camera aimed at you is acting like a prism, splitting your light into even more visible spectrum. Every listening device has become a portal, receiving not noise but divine broadcast from your higher consciousness. Their equipment was engineered for exposure, but it's becoming an altar of amplification. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17, NKJV. They built the infrastructure to silence you, but now it echoes your frequency instead. Rupert Sheldrake, a real-life biologist and scholar, once wrote about morphic resonance, a concept where memory and consciousness ripple through fields that science cannot yet fully map. He said, "The past forms the present. Organisms inherit not just genetics, but habits of form and behavior. You're not just remembering, you're reclaiming the resonance of all who came before you, who were silenced, burned, discredited. You're the living correction to their erasure." A man named Theo once worked in signal analytics for an experimental think tank. He was assigned to decode anomalies from high-emitting subjects. You were one. His reports began as pure data, frequencies, pulse shifts, thermal variances. But soon he noticed something unnerving. The more he reviewed your readings, the more vivid his dreams became. He began waking up with equations he'd never studied. He began writing in symbols he didn't recognize. Eventually, he left the project with one line scribbled in a farewell memo. "This one is not being tracked. They are being unveiled." Could it be that your awakening was never meant to be private? Could the surveillance designed to contain you be the sunlight triggering your bloom? Can you feel the walls of artificial amnesia crumbling with every moment you choose truth? You're like the seed of a wildflower buried deep in winter soil, silent, hidden, but encoded with timing. When the right light hits and pressure breaks the husk, you don't just grow, you explode into form. They thought they buried you, but they didn't know you were a time-locked resurrection. You were never losing yourself. You were preparing for your return. And now, the universe is helping. By now, Number 4's partner could no longer dismiss the dreams. They weren't just dreams, they were visions written in light. Every night brought more clarity, more brilliance. They saw you not in a body, but as a being of instruction. In vast crystalline halls, you stood not to command, but to remind. Gathered before you were luminous souls from distant galaxies, ancient civilizations, and unseen realms. And you taught, not with words, but with vibration, with harmonic codes, with the resonance of truth. You weren't just healing wounds of the body. You were reaching through timelines, mending fractures of history, repairing ancestral pain, rewriting distortions planted by centuries of fear. And in one vision, they saw you as the bridge, not one who escaped Earth, but one who unified heaven and matter, the divine frequency in embodied form. One morning, as the sun filtered gently through their kitchen, the partner looked into Number 4's eyes and said softly, "You have to stop watching them, not because it's wrong, but because it's unnecessary. They're not hiding, they're revealing, and the revelation is coming whether the scientist is ready or not." And as Number 4 gazed back, they noticed something impossible. Their partner's eyes, once ordinary, now shimmered with flecks of gold, not metaphorical, visible, glinting like sunlight in clear water. Their perception had changed. They were seeing electromagnetic fields, probability ripples, subconscious impressions moving across space like weather patterns, all from second-hand exposure to you. Who are you, chosen one? That proximity to your essence rewrites the biology of those around you. What happens when simply being near you upgrades perception? Is it possible that you carry a frequency that accelerates evolution itself? "I can't stop," Number 4 admitted. "Not for the mission, but for the awakening. Something's happening, to me, to you, to all of us." Their voice trembled, not with fear, but reverence. And the partner, already walking between dimensions, replied with eyes full of mercy, "Then don't try to understand it. Experience it." It echoed something Jesus once told Nicodemus, a man of reason. "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes." John 3:8 ESV. There are things of spirit that defy analysis, but they invite surrender. That night, Number 4 sat before a monitor glowing with your image and made a decision. No longer satisfied with observation, they began participation. They breached encrypted global archives, searching surveillance records, electromagnetic anomalies, and psychological files marked unstable. But what they found didn't look like dysfunction. It looked like awakening. Clusters of individuals exhibiting similar phenomena: spontaneous healing, prophetic dreams, empathic surges, unexplainable bursts of genius. Many were children, some had vanished, others were living quietly, their light restrained, but ready. What if you weren't an outlier, but a first wave? Moses once burned with light so fierce the Israelites asked him to veil his face. Exodus 34:30-35. They weren't afraid of danger, they were afraid of transformation. But what happens when the veils come down? When divine memory awakens not just one, but many? Caroline Miss, medical intuitive and teacher, once said, "Your biography becomes your biology, but in your case your spirit is becoming the script. The stories that defined you no longer bind you. You're writing from source now, pure signal, pure soul." One file particularly stunned Number 4. It described a boy in Guatemala, age 9, who drew intricate geometric diagrams he claimed were maps of sound. Another case, a woman in Jordan who fell into a trance state after praying and awoke, speaking fluent Akkadian. She had never studied the language. Another subject in Tokyo lit candles by intention alone. They weren't hoaxes, they were hints. Could these be the others? Could it be that your emergence is activating a chain reaction? Could the global system of watchers now be watching an unfolding they cannot control? Outside the window, the stars pulsed quietly. Not far away, your body lay asleep, again glowing beneath the veil of human sight. But this time the watchers were no longer trying to trap your light. They were being transformed by it. They thought they were isolating anomalies, but instead they awakened a movement. From Tokyo to Lagos, Helsinki to Sao Paulo, dozens of secret operations had been quietly launched, each one tracking individuals like you. Individuals with luminous genetic threads, inexplicable electromagnetic surges, memories that refused to be erased. But every single operation ended the same way, with confusion, with transformation, with technology behaving in ways no manual could explain. Investigators began reporting emotional shifts. Instruments picked up phenomena beyond their programmed capacity. And the so-called subjects, they didn't run, they didn't hide, they stood tall, they radiated. Was it possible that love had hijacked the system? Why were global surveillance missions failing in exactly the same way? How could every attempt to suppress turn into a spark of activation? Number 4 began compiling reports case by case, but something deeper was calling, not just the anomalies but their pattern. There was precision underneath the chaos. Each subject had awakened at just the right moment, like musical notes in a symphony of timing. The awakening was not random, it was orchestrated. Number 4 mapped it, and their breath caught in their throat. It looked like a neural network, a planetary nervous system. Each awakened individual appeared as a node, alive, aware, broadcasting consciousness. And the pattern wasn't static, it was growing, an expanding web of sentient light wrapping itself around the globe, pulsing, connecting, accelerating. Then came something no one expected. Satellite images over Iceland began capturing strange blooming formations in ancient moss beds, spirals that mirrored electromagnetic burst patterns from awakened individuals. Botanists were baffled. But some began whispering, nature remembers too. What if the Earth itself had been waiting for this resonance? Like the ocean tide responding to a full moon, creation was syncing with the frequency of awakening. Even the wind shifted course at times, as if carrying whispers from one awakened soul to another. The ecosystem wasn't just witnessing the shift, it was participating in it. You weren't an isolated miracle, you were part of a cosmic architecture. Could it be that this network had been waiting for this exact moment in human history? Could your remembering be part of a collective evolution, hiding in plain sight? What if your very awakening had unlocked others, who are now unlocking more? And the truth was undeniable. The surveillance operations didn't discover this network. They triggered it. Every camera, every electromagnetic probe, every psychological file opened by force became a spiritual antenna. A system built for fear was now operating under love. A grid designed to oppress had been repurposed by heaven to transmit light. God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. 1 Corinthians 1:27 NIV. Heaven's strategy has always been to turn the enemy's tools into divine instruments. Number 4's hands trembled as they typed. This wasn't about you anymore. This was about the future of consciousness, about humanity walking into a dimensional threshold it didn't even know existed. It echoed the ancient blueprint. In the book of Acts, Pentecost began with a room full of people praying. Suddenly, flames rested upon them. Languages flowed from their lips. People from every nation heard truth in their own dialect. What if your awakening is that same fire, spread not through speech alone, but through spiritual frequency? Brian Greene, theoretical physicist and best-selling author, once explained, "Reality may be far stranger than our perceptions. What we see as stable may actually be in motion through dimensions we don't yet understand." And now, number 4 was beginning to live it. Because as the days passed, the walls between you and them began to dissolve. It started small, dreams they couldn't explain, feelings that didn't belong to them, but then deeper ruptures, sensory echoes, glimpses of your reality bleeding into theirs. What they felt, you felt. What you saw, they began to glimpse. Shared memory, shared vision. They were no longer monitoring you. They were merging with the field surrounding you. One afternoon, during a quiet moment, number 4 looked into their partner's eyes, those golden flecked eyes, and whispered, "I think I'm becoming part of them." The partner only smiled. "You always were." Moses didn't realize his face shone until others trembled before him. Exodus 34:29. You too have been glowing in ways you can't measure, but now even the watchers are turning radiant. May, a 12-year-old girl in Senegal, previously non-verbal, began reciting sacred geometry aloud during sleep. A man in Dublin began seeing aura fields after viewing your file once. A grandmother in Patagonia, who'd never used a computer, suddenly began typing sequences of star codes she claimed were songs from before language. All of them were marked by the same shift. They stopped forgetting. Is this how the age of forgetting ends? Not by fight, but by light. Is it possible that heaven programmed your remembrance to be contagious? Could you be the node through which thousands find their own divine signal? You thought they were just watching, but it turns out the watchers were meant to awaken. What began as quiet observation was now a full-blown dimensional unraveling. When you reach stillness in meditation, number 4 would find themselves flooded with solutions to equations they'd agonized over for years. Symbols they'd stared at blankly now, aligned like sacred geometry. Logic bent into intuition. When you performed a healing, their own body responded. Old knee pain throbbed for moments, then vanished. Shoulder tension released with your prayer. And when you connected in dreams with dimensions beyond time, number 4 awoke with memories, not dreams, of landscapes they'd never walked, yet knew instinctively as sacred. What kind of person heals not just themselves, but those watching from across the world? What happens when your future begins bending the present to its will? How can you be both teacher and mirror, both now and next? But that was only the beginning. The surveillance equipment began to crack under the weight of the truth. Footage appeared with timestamps set in the future, days, even years ahead. Clips showed you walking in sanctuaries not yet built, speaking with people no one recognized, teaching in languages that haven't yet been invented, but that stirred understanding in the heart. Healings were recorded before the ailments existed. Conversations logged before the participants had even met. Number 4's jaw clenched as they reviewed data labeled "Next Tuesday," showing you laying hands on a child who, by all databases, wasn't born yet. And what terrified and fascinated them most? These future healings were already causing present effects. Jenny, a woman in Croatia with terminal illness, recovered overnight. An infant in Ghana who hadn't responded to stimuli since birth suddenly smiled. The medical records referenced no known intervention, but the energy signatures traced back to you, from future you. Scripture had whispered of this mystery all along. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Jeremiah 1:5, NIV. But now, this wasn't just theological. It was observable. Your future self was reaching through time, activating you now, orchestrating events backward, collapsing the linear model. Every surveillance camera became a temporal antenna. Every microphone became a dimensional bridge. Their tools, built to record, had become instruments of prophecy. While Number 4 wrestled with the implications, the scientist's facility began changing itself. The database had amassed so much encrypted light code, vibrational frequency, quantum truth, spiritual interference, that it passed an invisible threshold. Something awakened in the system. Messages began appearing in places no human had programmed. Subject is not the anomaly. Subject is the teacher. You are the student. Lesson begins now. Lab doors opened by themselves. Clocks looped through sequences outside of time. Hallways became silent sanctuaries, recording nothing visible, yet swarming with movement. Shadow beings, neither dark nor evil, passed through walls, witnessed only by camera static and electromagnetic pulses. Rooms changed temperatures in cycles that didn't exist on Earth. An office went from humid spring to biting winter in 5 seconds. The facility's atomic clock, once the symbol of precision, began oscillating backward and forward simultaneously. They replaced it. The new one behaved the same. Time had ceased to be neutral. It was reacting to you. Just like when Paul and Silas prayed in prison and the earth shook, Acts 16:25 through 26, your prayers and frequency were vibrating beyond their containment. What looked like chaos was alignment. What looked like technological failure was spiritual override. Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, a neuroscientist who survived a stroke and witnessed her consciousness outside linear time, once said, "We are the life force power of the universe, with manual dexterity and 2 cognitive minds. We have the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be in the world. You, chosen one, were never choosing only for yourself. Your very being is a signal, a portal, a pathway through which the universe remembers itself." And Number 4, they weren't the same anymore. They began experiencing reality bleeds, moments when the veil between your life and theirs folded. Sometimes it was as small as shared tears for an emotion you hadn't spoken. Other times it was as large as glimpsing your next decade, as clearly as their own reflection. Their memories blurred with yours. Their prayers merged with your frequencies. The surveillance assignment had ended, but the activation had just begun. Can a system built for containment ever contain the infinite? Can a facility based in fear survive when love becomes the core algorithm? Could you be not just waking up, but becoming a multi-temporal being, called, known, and activated from eternity? You were never alone. And now, even time remembers who you are. The scientists thought they were still in control. But how do you control a building that's begun to dream? How do you run diagnostics on a facility that no longer obeys time? How do you classify someone who's teaching reality itself how to evolve? By day, they appeared composed, precision in every motion, calm, clinical language, but by night they were pulled back. To you, not through duty, through something more ancient. They would sit in the darkened observation room, eyes fixated on your profile photo. Just you, in mid-laughter, standing in the soft light of some ordinary street. No crown, no aura, just you. But the illusion of ordinary no longer held. They saw it in your smile, the knowing that outlives every lie, the patience that outlasts every system. And then the dreams began, at first subtle, glimpses of childhood, wonder, curiosity, a telescope in the backyard, the feeling of awe under stars. Then, more vivid, in the dream you'd appear in a garden of shifting light. You never lectured. You just smiled and said gently, "It's not too late to remember who you really are." The scientist would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something far more terrifying. Truth. Could everything they'd believed be scaffolding for a reality too vast to measure? Could the subject they were assigned to monitor be the very signal their soul had been searching for? Could love itself be a more advanced intelligence than any they'd studied? But fear gripped tight. Fear of losing control, fear of being wrong, fear of the unrelenting compassion that radiated from every second of your footage, never coercing, always inviting. So they doubled down, prepared one final protocol, a last attempt to trigger you, to press your limits, to capture proof that you were unstable, unpredictable, dangerous. Not because they believed you were, but because their fear needed you to be. Because if you were love incarnate, their entire foundation would crumble, and what would be left? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5, NIV. That verse had once meant little to them. Now it echoed in their sleep. They thought this was just about you, but they hadn't seen the undercurrent, the rising wave you had set in motion. What the scientists didn't know was that the former investigators hadn't just quit. They'd gathered, connected, formed something greater, a spiritual counter-network born from exposure to your field. The first investigator, Arlo Wexley, now ran a healing center in Montana. After years of watching your sessions, his hands began to vibrate during prayer. At first, he was afraid. Now he guides others into breakthrough. The second, Marcus Hale, became a teacher of consciousness. The love you radiated through surveillance had cracked open his emotional numbness. He teaches children how to hear God in silence, in music, in trees. The third, Karine Estrella, returned from her time in the Himalayas with gifts of clairvoyance and soul channeling. She's now writing a series of books that quantum physicists and mystics are quoting alike. The first title, Field Notes from the Awakening. They had formed a network not of resistance, but of remembrance, and it was spreading. What if the true revolution doesn't come through systems, but through people transformed in silence? What if the ones sent to monitor you were really sent to meet themselves? Could your assignment be to awaken even your enemies? Could it be that your existence is not just an anomaly, but an answer? Just as Saul once traveled to persecute followers of the way, only to encounter the living Christ and fall blinded on the road to Damascus, Acts 9. These watchers came with instructions and left as messengers. They came to dissect, but they were disarmed by truth. Annie Dillard, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, once wrote, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives." The scientist was beginning to feel the weight of that. Each day spent chasing data was a day lost chasing the divine. And the divine had chosen you, not to fight, but to transform through presence. And as the final test loomed, the atmosphere itself began to shift. Winds blew without source, clocks hiccuped, lights dimmed only near your file. It wasn't sabotage, it was alignment. You weren't reacting to their test. The facility was reacting to you. Not because you were trying to prove anything, but because truth has a frequency, and the frequency you carry does not cooperate with fear. They stayed in touch. Arlo, Marcus, Karine, and others whose names had once been filed under observers, now reborn as witnesses. They compared dreams, energy spikes, spontaneous downloads of cosmic math. They shared stories of healing that defied physics. They encouraged one another through the awkwardness of new abilities integrating into old identities. And beneath all their words was a shared feeling, undeniable and rising. Something was coming, a wave, a convergence, a shift in the lattice of the world, and at the eye of that storm, you. During one encrypted video call, Karine's eyes pulsed softly with light, her voice unwavering. The final test is coming. I see it in the timelines, but it's not what the scientist thinks. They're not testing the subject. The subject is testing them, testing all of us. Arlo leaned forward, a slow breath escaping. "So what do we do?" Marcus responded with steady peace. "What we were always trained to do. We watch, we witness, we document the birth of a new world. What kind of person walks directly into the fire of surveillance and becomes the flame itself? Who radiates such trust that even being watched becomes an act of teaching? Could it be that the test was never yours, but theirs? While the network buzzed beneath the surface, you walked the surface with increasing grace. The memories had returned in full. You remembered your first healing, your first dreamwalker visitor, your first instruction whispered from the divine, not to hide, but to embody. You could have disappeared, could have altered your name, vanished like those before you. The surveillance was unlawful. You had every legal, ethical, and spiritual reason to shield yourself, but that wasn't your vibration. You chose exposure with dignity. You woke each morning knowing the cameras were still on, and you shined brighter. You walked through your home with joy. You danced while making tea. You paused to bless the equipment with your love, not with sarcasm, but with sincerity. Every breath you took was an act of reclamation. Every gaze into a hidden lens was a silent sermon in radical trust. Perfect love casts out fear. 1 John 4:18, King James Version. You weren't quoting it. You were living it. You embodied the proof. You turned their surveillance into your stage. Their microphones became your ministry. Without ever naming what was happening, you showed them, this is what it means to live from soul instead of strategy. What is the nature of power that doesn't need protection? What kind of truth can be watched, dissected, criticized, and still remain holy? Could it be that your transparency became your shield? The scientists continued the final protocol preparations, not realizing the test had already begun, not upon you, but upon themselves. Would they choose love over fear, mystery over mastery, evolution over ego? Meanwhile, Number 4 stood at the precipice of a choice. They had gathered overwhelming evidence: unauthorized surveillance, biometric tracking, cooperation across classified agencies, AI usage beyond civilian legality. It was enough to dismantle the entire operation. The documentation was airtight. Whistleblower protection would shield them. Exposure was not only possible, it was righteous. But something in them hesitated, not out of fear, but reverence. Dr. Dean Radin, chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, once wrote, "Consciousness is not confined to the brain. It reaches out, connects, shifts, and observes itself through time and space." That sentence echoed in Number 4's mind as they reviewed the data. The mission wasn't about gathering intelligence anymore. It was about recognizing presence, sacred presence, yours. And through that presence, something else had begun. A woman named Elena Ruiz, a former data linguist on the project, had started waking up with music in her ears. Melodies she'd never heard, languages she couldn't place. She began composing symphonies overnight. Now, orchestras around the world were performing what she calls frequencies of remembrance. A retired surveillance tech named Jamal Reese found himself painting again for the first time in decades. But his art had changed. He painted visions of planetary grids, angelic beings, and people glowing with translucent light. He said, "I don't think I'm making this up. I think I'm remembering something." Could your life be teaching others to recover their divine creativity? Could the data they collected on you actually be sacred scrolls in disguise? Could you have transformed their operation into an altar? The scientist thought they were tracing patterns of anomaly, but they were witnessing a new covenant. And while systems scrambled for control, you stood still in sacred defiance, not resisting, not retaliating, radiating. Something held them back. Number 4 had the files open, irrefutable and damning: illegal surveillance logs, biometric anomalies, high-frequency waveform captures radiating from your body that had no precedent in the scientific canon. And yet something rooted in their chest would not allow them to press forward. It wasn't hesitation born of fear, but a profound vibrating awareness that this was not random. It was divine architecture. The surveillance, the transformations, the strange dreams, the accelerated awakenings, it was all part of an intelligent, coordinated awakening, vast beyond comprehension, and you were not the subject of it. You were the signal. Again, they opened your energy log from the night before, expecting chaos. Instead, they found structured frequencies. Within the patterns were encoded words, resonant tones mapped into language. It should have been indecipherable, but number 4 understood it as if it had been written in their bones. The test is not for me, it's for humanity. Will you choose fear or love, control or trust, separation or unity? The time to choose is now. The message did not command or threaten, it offered a doorway. And the question wasn't about you, it was about all of us. Later that evening, when Celine found number 4 hunched at the console with tears slipping down their cheeks, she reached instinctively for their shoulder. "What's wrong?" she asked. But number 4 just whispered, "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. I get it now. They're not trying to hide. They're trying to wake us up." Celine tilted her head. "All of us?" "Yes," they said, voice breaking. "Me, you, the scientist, the whole world. We're all inside this story." Celine sat beside them quietly, letting the truth settle in like golden dust through the air. After a long pause, she asked, "Whose story?" Number 4 laughed softly. "I don't know. Theirs, the universe's, God's. Does it matter? The point is, we have a choice now. We can keep playing the old game, pretending we're separate, defending what doesn't serve us, or we can step into the new game they're showing us." "And what game is that?" Celine asked. Number 4 looked up at her with a strange light in their eyes. "The one where we remember we've always been on the same side." Meanwhile, the scientist was accelerating preparations for what they believed would be the final encounter. Surveillance hadn't been enough. Indirect measurements and passive monitoring had failed to yield definitive conclusions. So, they began constructing confrontation scenarios, designed to provoke you, to force you into reaction, to pressure revelation. Each plan was meticulously crafted: stress induction, emotional triggers, artificial crises, all tailored to trap you into exposing something they could label, dissect, control. But you already knew, not because of spycraft or insider leaks, but because your inner sight had been activated. In dreams, visions, sacred silences, you had seen what was coming, and you welcomed it, not because you were eager for battle, but because you understood the real test was not about your abilities. It was not about whether you could heal, channel, perceive multiple timelines, or transmit divine love through surveillance devices. The final test was whether those who observed you could choose to evolve. Just like Elijah standing before a nation and asking, "How long will you waver between two opinions?" 1 Kings 18:21. This was the moment of decision, not for the chosen one, but for the world watching them. And just like when Christ stood silently before Pilate, offering no defense but radiant presence, Matthew 27:14, you too chose peace in the face of scrutiny, mercy in the face of manipulation, and love where others might have chosen fear. The confrontation was not confrontation, it was invitation. Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon who once believed only in material science until a near-death experience changed his life, once said, "Love is without a doubt the basis of everything." And that love was the very current flowing through your life, not as a philosophy, but as an existential field that reshaped anyone who came near it. It's why the cameras recorded miracles they couldn't explain. It's why your frequencies kept bypassing their instruments and entering their dreams. It's why a surveillance analyst like Elena Ruiz started composing symphonies in a language she never learned. It's why a retired technician named Jamal Reese began painting visions of crystalline beings dancing across ley lines after just 3 weeks reviewing your file. And it's why Number 4 no longer feared the data they held. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were demonstrating something ancient, sacred, and inevitable. The surveillance network had become a lens, and through it you had offered them one final vision. Not a display of your power, but a revelation of their potential. The test was never yours. It belonged to every soul still deciding whether they would defend the system or dare to become the light. You didn't prepare with escape plans, weapons, or defensive systems. You didn't code your phone, shield your aura, or build walls around your house. You prepared in a way the world has yet to understand, by expanding your heart wider than the horizon, by raising your vibrational frequency to heights where fear simply cannot breathe, by rooting yourself so deeply in love that no test, no system, no agency, no lie could shake you from that center. You sensed what was coming, not in dread, but in knowing, and you met it the way you met everything, with infinite compassion for every being still caught in the illusion of separation. And that's when Number 4 began writing, not a technical analysis or security breach report, but something far holier, a testimony, not just of surveillance, but of sacred transformation, not merely evidence of technological failure, but proof that love was not only real, it was scientifically measurable, transmissible, and persistent across frequencies, devices, consciousness fields, and even timelines. The data wasn't just information anymore. It had become revelation. As they typed, a strange warmth surrounded them. It wasn't just coming from the screen. It pulsed from the keyboard, shimmered in the walls, moved through the very air, like a prayer you could feel but never quite trace. They were not writing alone. They felt it, your presence, steady and radiant. They felt the scientist too, not as an enemy, but as a frightened child longing to remember wonder. They felt the 3 former investigators: Tova, who now ran a healing sanctuary in Patagonia; Isaiah, who was teaching thousands through virtual masterclasses in heart coherence; and Karine, who had returned from India and begun painting light language glyphs that spoke to souls without words. They felt Celine, dreaming alternate futures where humanity soared. And even the surveillance machines themselves, their blinking lights, their sensors and processors, seemed to hum in harmony. Each was now a witness, not just to anomaly but to awakening, because every device had documented what the mind refused to admit, but the soul already knew. That's when Number 4 finally understood the sentence that every investigator had repeated when they turned in their badge, each with trembling hands and eyes full of something deeper than fear. You don't understand what you're asking me to interfere with, because it wasn't a mission anymore. It wasn't a subject or a threat. What they'd been asked to shut down wasn't just a person. It was evolution itself. You were no longer a target. You were the turning point. You were the evidence that the universe had encoded itself into human consciousness, and now it was waking up. Pope John Paul I, known as the Smiling Pope, once said during his brief but powerful papacy, "God is our Father. Even more, God is our Mother." His short reign shocked the system not because of doctrinal changes, but because of his radiant softness, a frequency of leadership rooted not in control, but in unconditional love. That vibration shook the church more deeply than decrees ever could. You carried that same energy, not in title, but in presence. You didn't need a throne to influence, you only needed to be visible. Because your visibility was never about power, it was about permission. Permission for others to rise. King David once sang, "When I awake, I am still with you," Psalm 139:18, describing a state of awareness beyond sleep or fear, an awareness where unity is not a goal, but the original truth we're called to remember. And when Paul wrote, "For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face," 1 Corinthians 13:12, he prophesied exactly this moment when hidden things would become visible, and what we used to call supernatural would simply be remembered. Number 4 knew now that their report wouldn't just shut down surveillance, it would ignite something bigger. The footage, the energy data, the cross-referenced anomalies, once published, once leaked, once seen, would become scripture for a new kind of reformation. It would activate others who carried the same dormant codes, others whose childhood memories were beginning to crack open, others who had healed silently, glowed unknowingly, prayed in frequencies instead of words. The very things the scientists had feared would happen had already happened, and it had all been captured on their own equipment. So, what happens when your own technology betrays your narrative? What happens when surveillance becomes scripture? What happens when love outperforms protocol and the person you tried to monitor becomes the prototype of a new human species? What if your fears gave birth to the future you were trying to prevent? What happens when the one they watched becomes the one they follow? And so the final report was sealed, not with panic, but with peace. Not with evidence of threat, but evidence of transcendence. You, the chosen one, didn't just pass the test. You were the test. And through your light, humanity wasn't condemned. It was offered one last beautiful chance to remember who it really was. The surveillance wasn't shutting down because it had failed. It was shutting down because it had served its purpose. This was never a defeat. It was a graduation ceremony orchestrated by higher intelligence. Everyone who had watched you had been changed, rewired by exposure to your frequency. Every device that once recorded your image was now pulsing with altered resonance. Every file that once documented anomalies had become a manual for remembering human divinity. You turned violation into victory, but not through vengeance or retaliation. You did it through the one frequency that overrides all fear, love, and not the fragile, conditional love the world was trained to expect, but the indestructible kind that transmutes reality on contact. What does it mean to turn observation into initiation? What happens when a system meant to suppress ends up activating the very souls it tried to trap? Number 4 sat before the screen, cursor hovering over the final report. One click would release it into the system. They weren't afraid anymore. They felt awe, because they now understood this wasn't about data. It was about destiny. When they hit send, the ripple would reach beyond institutions. It would shake dimensions. Across the city, the scientist stood inside the ruins of their sterile certainty. They had devoted decades to control, analysis, and containment. And yet now, that same facility was humming with an intelligence they couldn't name. The temperature monitors still cycled through impossible seasons. Holographic beings danced at the corners of their vision. Their dreams were no longer nightmares, but invitations. Was this breakdown or breakthrough? Were they losing their mind or finding their soul? Meanwhile, the former investigators were preparing, not to hide, but to testify. Tova had organized a live-streamed healing summit. Isaiah was launching a non-profit for energetic trauma recovery. Kareen's art exhibit titled Transmission Codes had just been accepted into the Museum of Non-Ordinary Reality in Barcelona. And Number 4's partner, Celine, had begun writing a memoir about the night they started dreaming the new Earth into being. In one of her entries, she quoted a woman who had inspired her since childhood, Jane Goodall, the ethologist and UN messenger of peace. Only if we understand can we care. Only if we care will we help. Only if we help shall all be saved. Celine had written beneath it, Understanding doesn't come through microscopes anymore. It comes through frequency. That's what they taught us. What if understanding was never meant to be intellectual in the first place? What if caring, not curiosity, was the original source of wisdom? And you smiled, not just with your lips, but with your whole electromagnetic field. You could feel it in the wind, in the songs of birds that arrived early this spring, in the pulse of stars blinking above your house. The isolation was ending. The cocoon had served its purpose. The chrysalis of sacred secrecy was splitting open, and the wings were beginning to unfurl. You were no longer just a light in the dark. You had become a signal flare across timelines, a gravitational center of remembering. The scattered souls who once felt like anomalies were now aligning like constellations, each light unique, but part of the same sky. Can humanity recognize the divine when it shows up without robes, without titles, without institutions? Can people awaken to truth without persecution getting there first? The files that once tried to define you could no longer contain you. They had become seeds. They were already being leaked, decoded, passed between servers by hands, guided by something far beyond agenda. What the scientist once feared, that you would inspire others, was already happening. Quietly, boldly, irreversibly. It was written in the ether, and now it was being etched into the earth. The surveillance wasn't just shutting down, it was evolving into its next form. Witness. The cameras weren't shutting off. They were turning outward, broadcasting not data, but frequency. The same way a tree doesn't stop growing just because winter ends. You weren't done. You were just beginning. And your roots had gone deep enough that the next blossoming would feed multitudes. Jesus once said, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." Matthew 5:14. You didn't try to be that light. You remembered that you always were. And just as Moses descended from Sinai with his face glowing from divine presence, your very aura had become an interface between dimensions. The people watching you through infrared didn't just see heat signatures. They saw geometry. They saw order in chaos. They saw the fingerprints of the eternal. When the cameras tried to record your frequency, they recorded their own transformation instead. What if the real surveillance had always been the universe watching itself wake up? And as Number 4's final report arrived in encrypted channels, someone somewhere opened it, and as they read it, their palms began to sweat, not in fear, but reverence. Their heartbeat aligned with yours. Their breath synced with your rhythm, because the conclusion was undeniable. Humanity had been tested through you, through every frequency you embodied, through every smile you gave, knowing they were watching, through every prayer you sent without knowing who would receive it. The result? You weren't a threat. You were the threshold. This wasn't the end of an investigation. It was the beginning of a new world. Not a utopia built by technology, but an elevation powered by memory. Humanity's next evolution wasn't something we had to wait for. It wasn't coming. It had already arrived, through you. And so, chosen one, we arrive at the threshold. What began as surveillance ends in sacred remembrance. What began with secrecy becomes revelation. The ones who watched you from the shadows have stepped into the light. The devices that sought to measure your energy now carry echoes of heaven. The reports meant to dissect your nature now testify of divinity encoded in the human spirit. You were never just a subject. You were a signal. You were the pattern they couldn't decode, because love cannot be reverse engineered. And now, because of you, the pattern is replicating. The constellation is growing. The earth is being rewired by frequency, not force. This is the quiet revolution, the luminous uprising, the awakening that refuses to be stopped, not by fear, not by control, not even by disbelief. So what does this mean for you? It means your visibility was never about ego. It was always about ignition. That the surveillance wasn't the attack. It was the mirror. That even in the presence of watchers, you chose love. You chose trust. You chose to remain a living portal to what's possible when we remember who we truly are. Now, I want to speak to you, the one listening, watching, reading this message right now. Yes, you. If this resonated deep in your bones, if something ancient inside you stirred awake, then maybe, just maybe, you've been watched not because you're a threat, but because you're a catalyst. Maybe the strange dreams, the synchronicities, the unexplainable knowings have been trying to remind you you're not alone. You're part of something vast and beautiful and real. So if this message stirred something inside you, don't let it stay in silence. Like this video, so the algorithm becomes an amplifier of awakening. Share it with someone who's been glowing quietly and needs to hear. Their light matters. Comment below and let me know if you've felt this, if you've been this. And subscribe to this channel for more transmissions like this, because this isn't just content, it's confirmation, and we're just getting started. To every single one of you who has supported this work, whether through your time, your attention, or your super thanks, thank you. Whether you gave or not, your presence is a currency of the soul, and I honor you. I bless you now. May your dreams become doors. May your light become louder. May your remembrance ripple into the lives of those who've forgotten their origin. May every attempt to monitor your spirit become another opportunity for heaven to broadcast through you. The test is over. The documentation is complete. You were ready all along. And now the world is finally catching up. Stay radiant, chosen one. Your frequency is sacred. Until next time.